that stuck with me was guided. This all really paints a strong picture there. Looking back, how do you feel about it now?
That is a good question. You should have told me that before.
Hello, I am Kaitlyn. I am the Reader's Librarian here at the library, so I have the pleasure of working with local authors. This is an amazing crowd. I was not expecting this. To those of you who are standing, I am so sorry, but we are kind of at capacity for seating. This will be recorded and uploaded to the Flint Hills Publishing YouTube. If you decide partway through that you need to leave, you can watch it on there. I really hope everyone can stay. I appreciate you all coming. Without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Tom Averill, who's going to offer our introduction to our guest tonight.
I feel guilty sitting down and when so many are standing, but that will assure you that you'll get a standing ovation. Of course, any introduction to a memoir writer risks some redundancy. After all, when you read the book, you'll learn all the details. In Craig Yorke's book, From Conception to Completion, near the beginning of Steep, he writes, I was conceived in December 1947 on the 3rd floor of 218 West Canton Street, a brownstone in Roxbury, Boston's Black Ghetto. And near the end he writes, I punched my ticket and paid for success. The price was my childhood, its friendships, and its daydreams, what might have been the arc of my identity in a more friendly world. You will learn that Craig Yorke attended Boston Latin School, an all-boys public school covering grades 7 to 12, founded in 1635, making it the oldest public school in the nation. There, he excelled. Craig writes, my duty to history was to succeed in this even now most competitive year of my life, to win a place in the 8th grade. I did my duty. And on to Harvard, undergraduate medical school. He writes, an early acceptance letter from Harvard landed in our mailbox on Corey Road with decisive weight, validating my parents' sacrifice and exile. And then, of course, on to a neurosurgery residence at the University of California, San Francisco, and then to practice in Topeka, where he has been since. And all of us can say thank goodness for that. As for many of you, Craig Yorke has been quite a presence in my life. His parents, once they moved to Topeka, attended the same church that I grew up in, First Congregational. Craig was part of the medical community, as was my father, and I see many of you here. In fact, my father's medical degree was from the University of California in San Francisco, where Craig did his training. Craig performed surgery on my sister and on my mother, and Craig played the violin. He insists on calling it a fiddle, and himself a fiddler, in the Topeka Symphony Orchestra. I used to see him on the 4th of July for some years as my father and I joined our bagpipe band to play in the Collins Park Parade. Craig spent time in Edinburgh and has an affection for Scotland, as you'll read about in Steep as well. And I have always valued, as I know you have, Craig's presence. When he told me he'd written a memoir, I volunteered right away to read an early draft. He had what he called my book, a draft that satisfied the goal of completing what he originally thought of as a letter to his sons. But he wanted a book, a letter that would encompass a world beyond family. He worked on what was then titled Steep Price, fine-tuning, shaping, clarifying, and now it is a book ready for that larger audience. And what's even better, Steep is our book, a memoir that belongs to all of us. Craig Yorke is quite modest about himself and his accomplishments, as you'll find out when you read his memoir. But in everything, from violin to education to surgical practice and now to creating steep. He's much more than a fiddler. He's a virtuoso.
Well, there's no need for me to say anything more. Have a good night.
That was a wonderful introduction. My name is Nathan Fredrickson. I'm the editor for Steep. I worked with Craig closely, and I've gotten to know him very well, and I've been very happy to know him. So, let's talk about your book. But before we get into too many details, since we're here at the beautiful Topeka Public Library, a major institution for this community, and since, as noted in your lovely introduction, you yourself have been an important institution of this community for a lot of your adult life. So, it's a story in and of itself. So, what brought you to Topeka? Why Topeka?
Oh boy, that kind of starts in the middle, doesn't it? Well, I guess I'd start with the title that wears two hats. The first, the easy one, is the steep climb of upward mobility from a gritty neighborhood to a neurosurgical practice. That kind of Horatio Alger story is well known and it has enduring popularity. But the second meaning, the steeping of self, the maturing, is what I hope is a through line of the book. And one of those moments of maturation came when I was finishing my surgical training. I had had a very steep upward academic climb. The jobs that were on offer were in nice places, assistant professor of neurosurgery in Atlanta, or Los Angeles, Pittsburgh. But I just, for reasons in the book, I felt for reasons of maturation, reasons of ethics, that it made sense to think about a place in Middle America. And by coincidence, I ran into a guy on a tennis court in Las Vegas at a neurosurgical meeting who was taking care of Northeast Kansas by himself. That was Jack Runnels, if anyone remembers. And he said, well, you can certainly take those academic jobs, but if you go there, you'll be superfluous. You'll be doing hand-me-down cases for several years, but if you come to Topeka, you'll be necessary on day one. But would you like to do skull-based tumors? Would you like to do complex spine? Would you like to do neurovascular stuff? And so Mary and I made an exciting road trip to Topeka from San Francisco, and between ourselves we'd given Topeka 6 months. But life rolled easy for the new parents. In 1 year, we were homeowners, parents, I was in practice, Mary was deep into horticulture and so forth, and teaching physical therapy, but that's how Topeka came to be.
Mm-hmm. And I know that it was a bit of a journey getting here as well. An interesting contrast between those early days out of San Francisco here to Topeka. I know you have a passage in your book about that very story. Is that one that you're hoping to share tonight?
Well, I'll try to remember it. I had a tortured relationship with my car. It was a pretty exotic car that was very high on maintenance. And we set off from San Francisco in June of 1980, and that summer set records for heat. And the puny air conditioner in our car died as we got into Nevada. And we're driving, we get to this endless frying pan. We get through Lyman, and we're in Goodland, and it's just unbelievable. And we had some water. Mary and I would spray each other, and we would spray the house plants that were in the back seat. And in the trunk was a little collection of Napa wine that was quietly turning to vinegar as we drove. We rolled into Topeka on the 4th day of our journey, and it was almost midnight. It was the Holiday Inn, 6th and Fairlawn. We rolled into that parking lot and got out of the car. It was midnight, 95 degrees. And I looked at the security lights for the hotel, and surrounding those lights were insects that were as big as birds. I took a look at our very, very foreign car, and the date was June 20, 1980.
So it's been a long journey, and that's just to speak of your medical career. But as you describe in your memoir, you have a wide variety of interests, a huge background, as discussed, a fiddler for the ages. So you had a wide variety in arts, in culture, a clear commitment to being a part of a community in an important way where you can offer service. So coming from that self-described Boston ghetto to being that pillar of Topeka, what set you on that direction? Why neurosurgery in particular, for example?
Well, it's a kind of a long story. I was born in 1948, tough neighborhood. My parents were ready to adopt. They had not had success, and I was an only child. I was born with some challenges. My foot wasn't right, my lungs weren't right. And my parents were extremely smart and extremely frustrated by their experience as black folks in Boston in the first half of the 20th century. And they decided that they would build me into a weapon against their experience. And that's kind of what they did. There was no achievement that was good enough, and there was always something more to be proven. So the violin began at age 6. I did not want to play, and that was completely irrelevant. A moment came when I was about 6, the year of Brown v. Board, actually. I was not doing well in first grade. I wasn't learning to read very well. My parents became aware of a technique called phonics that helped kids to read, and it was available only in suburban schools. So they decided to move to a GI Bill, blue-collar, white suburb of Boston, about 20 miles away. And that was kind of an earthquake for the extended family. My mom's brother offered my dad a pistol because he was sure we were going into harm's way. But that put me in a whole different cohort of people, a whole different way of being educated. The next milestone was entering 7th grade. Tom says at the Boston Latin School, let me interrupt. This book would not have happened but for this guy. But for Tom Averill, I would still be calling agents and publishers in New York and getting rejections and getting no calls back and so forth. So anyway, you go to this school. It was a cauldron. In those years, it was all boys. There was no exam required to get in. If you had a recommendation from your 6th grade teacher, you got in. And then they said, well, when the 7th grade is over, we're going to throw half the students out. We're going to send them back to their neighborhood schools. And you have to understand who the pupils were. These are the offspring of desperate immigrant folks, desperate blue-collar folks, desperate for a way up for their kid. So that was an inflection point, the 7th grade. The weaponization is a passage from the 9th grade that I'm going to try to annotate here, not to take too long. It's October, 7th grade. I come home with a C in Algebra. The report card said that was satisfactory. My mother disagreed. She instantly made an appointment to see the teacher. The teacher was a fellow named Mr. McCormick, who was a severe, quietly bigoted fellow. And the story begins after school on this afternoon. Mr. McCormick was a gray, stooped man. He managed a wan smile as he scanned my papers and assured Mom that merely reaching the 9th grade at this school meant serious overachievement for someone like me. and that I was obviously doing my best. He was on home turf, sure of himself, of me, and of my skin. He was a thin man in need of a smaller suit. His fingertips and lungs too much exposed to too much nicotine for too long. He had been born Irish in a hostile Anglo-Saxon town and would soon retire. As a kid, he'd certainly have seen the signs outside shops and restaurants. No dogs or Irish allowed. But power had shifted with time, and he could now credibly imagine himself to be white. That little word with serious weight, with many meanings. On that afternoon, he didn't feel any lack of melanin, only an abundance of ease and mastery. Mom's voice was quiet and docile. She seemed to shrink and he to swell as they spoke. She praised his skill and experience more than once and expressed complete agreement with his judgment. Once home, she said little. No need by now to name our mortal enemy or to review the existential stakes at play here in this algebraic arena. She had just delivered her latest masterclass in guile, her private tutorial in invisibility. Public stagecraft was matched now by intimate fury and deadly zeal for combat. Her breath came quickly. She took grim pleasure in the terrain of this battlefield, reminding me that mathematics gave less scope than English composition for bigotry. That my mission was to deliver bulletproof letters and numbers. The veins on her neck rose, but her voice did not. She hissed that my childhood was long past, that Dad would tutor me each night at our kitchen table, that I must certainly become a credit to the race. The term tough love can't hope to capture her ferocious glittering eyes and the rage in her whispered voice that afternoon, more tiger than Tiger Mom. My fear was as irrelevant as it was intense. I assembled an array of number 2 Faber pencils and soft, oversized pink erasers for the campaign. What gift I might have was a mystery, but the coming months of work were easy to foresee. I was drafted that day into the role of child soldier and left more than a few tears on that battered Formica table. But solving quadratic equations came in time to feel like buttoning my shirt. So that gives you a sense of what our home was like.
And you described beautifully the conditions that led to your parents to think this way, led to your community, all contributing to this way that you were raised as a weapon. A phrase that you used that stuck with me was guided missile. Really paints a strong picture there. But now with the power of hindsight, and especially having the success that you had, looking back, how do you feel about it now? Do you regret that that's how you were raised? Or is it something that you've continued to hold or appreciate as you've gotten older?
Well, that is a good question. You should have told me that before. I think that when you change one thing, you change everything. There's an image in Hinduism called Indra's net. You look at the night sky and you change one thing and everything changes. No, I don't think I would change how I grew up. The perspective that I have is a valuable one, I think.
I'm also remembering a story you told me, because you yourself are a father. And you told me, when thinking about raising your own kids and making things different, or in some ways the same, you had a particularly interesting story about advice that one of your sons gave you. Do you want to share that story? Do you care to mention that?
Yeah.
Maybe in reference to thinking about your own childhood?
Yeah, we'll jump ahead. We are in my home. I am struggling to be a dad to teenage boys, not doing as good a job as our own sons do. Our sons are just so much better dads than I was. It's amazing. But I'm in an argument with our younger son, and I'm holding forth, I'm warming up, and he says, "Dad, do not tell me what to do. Tell me what you did." And that stopped me in my tracks. And I take that sense to the inevitable question about the takeaway from the book. Beyond honoring the cover, the takeaway is to tell your story. It doesn't have to be a book. It can be a phone call. It can be a letter to the editor. It can be a coffee with your nephew or whatever. The takeaway is to tell your story. And I took that seriously from our boys. I would say to you that Steep is not a sermon. It is not a polemic. It's just scenes from a life. I mined my past with maybe only 20 or 25 drafts to get to this, for a more steeped perspective on myself and on the world. So tell your story. Do the work. Do the work. The rewards will astonish you. I really can't do better. You know, people say, why write a memoir? What's the reason to look back? What's the purpose of this memory? And I can't do better than a few lines from a poem that I wanted to end the book with. But Thea Rodemaker, thank you so much, said that the poet's family had all of the work in a trust and it would take years to get permission. But anyway, here are the lines. This is the use of memory for liberation, not less of love, but the expanding of love beyond desire. And so liberation from the future as well as the past. And for desire, you can put in craving, you can put in greed, or whatever. Anyway, I am far from liberated, but having done this, I think I know what direction I need to go. Oh, it's from my favorite poem. It's Four Quartets by an unlikely guy from St. Louis, Missouri, named T.S. Eliot.
So, why would you write your memoir now? What in particular inspired you to reflect, to tell these stories, to live up to this advice that you should tell your story and speak your truth?
Well, like I said, for years I've wanted to write a letter to our boys. What doesn't get said at the family reunions, what doesn't make it to Thanksgiving dinner. And then about 3 or 4 years ago, I had my moment. I'm standing in a big bookstore looking at the Black Studies section, and I'm seeing amazing scholarship. I'm seeing bulletproof thinking. I'm seeing just incredible diagnostic work. When you put your doctor hat on, all of this stuff is diagnostic. This was terrible, this went badly, this was gruesome. But I really couldn't find a lot of remedy. What would one person do based on this flood of information? And I didn't see any shelf space for one guy from one town in Kansas. And I thought, well, maybe I can change that. So I just started writing. And I had never written anything before. Because I studied music, I had a sense of what good writing sounds like. And I will say that every word you read in here has been spoken by me multiple times. So I do write with my ears. And I'm a big lover of poetry, the economy that poets have. Every word doing useful work. And finally, I'm a big fan of what Mark Twain said, really. The right word is lightning, the almost right word is a lightning book. And at 4 o'clock in the morning, I'd wake up, hey, why didn't I say this instead of that? Or flip this sentence, or move this paragraph, or whatever. And let me take this moment to thank this guy. I mean, he said, you know, first 2/3 of this book is really good. The last third, not so much. And what he did was, he said, you've got to explode the chronology. None of this A to B to C. And that really made it happen. So thank you.
It was really a pleasure to work with you on it. And one thing that I thought a lot about while editing this work, and had a bit of a laugh over because of our classic idiom of, well, it's not brain surgery. To think about the contrast of what seems to be a thing of such ease in the way that you describe it versus the surprisingly long task of writing, of drafting, and of formatting and of printing. So, maybe a nice little anecdote we can close out on before one more question that I have for you. What maybe was one of the harder moments, either in or out of surgery, in your medical practice, and how would you stack it up to the challenge of writing your own memoir?
Oh, boy, these unexpected questions. One of the hardest moments, I was ready with an easier moment here. One of the hardest moments was that redo anterior communicating artery aneurysm. That was deadly stuff because I knew all that could go horribly wrong. And I forget what page it's on here, but that was deadly. I guess the difference between that and this is that you get infinite redos on this. You don't like it, you do it again. But with the stuff I did, a lot of times there was no appeal. It was just, you do the best operations that's in you that day, and the chips fall where they may.
And as much time as we know it takes, at least you got the time. Right, yeah. So, you've alluded to it already about the illustration on your front. Okay. And you've given me so much incredible historical background and interesting analysis of this simple little picture. Not only does it have a great history, but I think it says a lot about what you're trying to say in your own story. So I'd love for you to share with everyone what you shared with me in that regard and how does it all link together.
Yeah. Here's a takeaway, this image. Okay. We go back to probably 1850, and there's a kid born in a town 100 miles south of Madrid. His name is Ramon y Cajal. His dad is a family doctor, and he is, by any measure, a juvenile delinquent. He gets thrown out of one school after another. He's attacking the neighbor's yard. They have a little cannon, and he's firing rounds into the neighbor's yard. And his dad says, "You like to draw, don't you, Ramon? Come with me." So he takes Ramon to the morgue, and he says, "Here's things you can draw." And Ramon starts drawing, and he turns into an anatomist. And he's an anatomist in this town south of Madrid. He becomes a little more prominent. He starts looking at the brain. He starts looking at brain cells. Well, the brain. At that time, now we're fast forward to 1890, 1895, everybody in Europe knew that the brain didn't have individual cells, that it was just this impenetrable network. No one knew how it worked. But Ramon had his microscope, which is not as good as what's at Topeka West or Island Park. He had this little microscope, and he had the ability to stain slides of brain. He couldn't photograph what he was seeing because the cameras weren't good enough. So he would do pen and ink. And he drew what he saw. And come 1900, 1899, he goes to a major meeting of scientists. And at that time, the science was going on in Germany, France, England. Spain was not part of the picture. So he goes to a corner of the room, sets up a table with a bunch of these drawings, his microscope, and the slides. And he calls over the senior people in the world, and he says, "I think you guys are wrong. I think that the brain actually has individual cells. Have a look." He said, and because of the structure of these cells, because of the way that they're arranged, I believe that they communicate with each other by electrical signals. And my microscope isn't strong enough to show the separations between these two. But I've looked at cells in different ages, and they change over time. And I think the changes in those cells reflect how people learn. And the way this story usually ends is that the leading lights of the field laugh this guy off. He dies in obscurity, and his ideas come to fruition years later. That did not happen. He totally turned the room upside down. People were just incandescent with what he had said. 3 years later, he wins the Nobel Prize for medicine. The only anatomist ever to do that. This art launches what we know as neuroscience. EMGs, MRIs, nerve biopsies, all of it comes from an artist. Furthermore, these cells, everybody in this room has about 15 million of them, sitting in close order right back here. And what they do is to restrain us. All of this stuff up here is listening. These cells are listening 24/7 to the tone in our muscles. And the little tiny thing here is how they speak. They speak to our muscles and they tell them to relax. And you think, why is that important? If you want to pick up a book and not throw it across the room, if you want the muscles of your eyes to track across a line of print, can't do it without these. So it's art, it's science, it's incredible imagination. It's a cover that is way ahead of what's inside the book, if I can put it that way. So don't judge the book by the cover, because the cover is world class.
Well, I gotta say, I think a combination of art, science, and imagination is a pretty good description of what's inside of the book, too. So I think it's appropriate.
Thank you. Thank you.
And thank you so much for sharing your story and for answering my questions here tonight. I think we should open up the rest of this time for anyone else to ask Dr. Yorke some questions.
Yep.
One of your accomplishments in your overachieving childhood was playing for the Boston Pops. Could you share with us the experience of how you got chosen and how you experienced the occasion?
Yeah, I'm 17. It's the spring of the senior year in high school. Out of the blue, my teacher says, I advanced your name to play with the Pops. He played in the Pops himself. It probably helped that Arthur Fiedler was an alumnus of the Boston Latin School, but I don't know. Anyway, I was to play the Bruch G minor concerto, and I was scared witless. And my teacher, who had been just so hard on me for year after year, said, I'm going to loan you my violin. My parents and I could have seen that as an act of incredible generosity. Instead, we were terrified that this was easily the most valuable thing that our little apartment had ever seen. He sold it late in life to buy a mansion somewhere. But, I showed up to play the rehearsal. Mr. Fiedler was very kind and so forth. The orchestra didn't need the time. They could play it in their sleep, but I benefited from the rehearsal. The night that we played, I remember walking out, and there was a huge bouquet of flowers. Fiedler gave me an amazingly false smile. And the next thing I remember is that someone said backstage, you played really well. So my anxiety really obliterated the whole experience. I do have the tape. My dad was insistent on getting that. And the tape reflects a really pretty credible performance. It went from reel to CD to DVD to now it's in the cloud somewhere. But that's the story of that playing. Yeah.
There must have come a point in your life when you had to decide between that violin and neuroscience. When did that happen?
Yeah, one was the inflection point when I stopped playing the fiddle or decided I was going to be an academic, go to college and all that. After I finished playing for the Pops, my teacher said, you can be a good violinist, but you're not going to be a great violinist. You can make a living at it, but your mom and your dad tell me that you've got some academic chops too, so you might want to do that. The coda is, I get to college and I quit practicing. I quit playing for 35 years. And the reason was that I felt that it was part of the surrogacy with my parents, that it was just eating my life, and I didn't play until I left the OR. I was 55 when I picked it up again.
I remember
All right.
you telling me once that John Adams, a contemporary opera composer, was in your class in Boston.
Yeah, he and I knew each other. He wouldn't remember me, but he was a brilliant clarinetist, actually. Anyway.
Generations. Thank you for being here and sharing your stories as you describe in your book. And you tell the stories of your parents, then you go on and tell the story of you and your wife traveling, and then you tell the story of your children, your sons, and how they're better fathers, or so then we know that there's another set of generations coming up.
Yeah.
Have any of them endeavored to follow you in your footsteps?
They saw the working conditions for a community neurosurgeon, and they went in another direction. One of the holes in this book, actually, is that I really wanted to write a paragraph about each boy toward the end, and frankly boast about it. But they said, nope, they vetoed that out of hand. So there you go.
All right, more a comment than a question. First, I want to say thank you very much. In 1996, I was ambulance from Manhattan to Stormont Vale, and you opened up my brain and saved my life. So I want to thank you for that. And first opportunity I've had since then to say that. So thank you very much.
When you say that,
I just wanted that opportunity. It's 30 years later. Oh my
Amazing.
gosh.
yeah.
You mentioned Boston quite a bit.
Yeah.
Who made the Great Migration?
Good question. My mother's family, she was born in 1918 in Newport News, Virginia. And a year later, they came to Roxbury. My dad was born in New Bedford, Massachusetts, 1912. And they met in, well, actually their first date, he was trying to teach her how to skate on the Charles River in Boston. It still froze over then. And my mom would always hasten to say that he asked her to marry him on the first date.
Actually, you also did surgery on my mother-in-law and allowed her to take a tumor off her spine and walk for another 30 years of her life. But on a more personal note, as you just talked about, one of my favorite stories showing your brilliance, not only in professional work, but also personally. How did you entice this pretty physical therapist named Mary on your very first date at your apartment?
Now that is some crazy stuff. When we first met, Mary and I were both living in Haight-Ashbury, which was a very edgy neighborhood in San Francisco. We were very much professional colleagues for a couple years at UCSF. I moved from the Haight to Twin Peaks, to a pretty sketchy apartment. I don't know how it didn't fall down the hill when the earth shook, but I thought, I'm going to have a housewarming. And for some bizarre reason, Mary was the only guest I asked.
Excuse me.
My name is Rita, and you did surgery on me in the late 80s. I was in excruciating pain. I had a vertebrae that was out of my spine, and it was cutting a nerve to my arm. And if I didn't have surgery, I would have lost the use of this arm. And you helped me. You helped me. And I want to thank you. Thank you Thank you.
For the record, that pain will catch your attention. You can be the strongest person on this planet, and you will stop with that pain.
I couldn't sleep.
Yeah.
I couldn't sit up.
Yeah.
I was a teacher during the time.
Yeah.
I had to go on leave. I had a lot of sick time, so it didn't affect me. And it was just painful. My sister tried to help me. I had to sit up in a chair.
Yeah.
And doing this right here.
Is
Yes.
Right.
That's exactly what I'm doing. Like this right here.
Oh, I know. Yeah, and
I'm glad you remember.
And honestly, that is an operation that, when it works, people are smiling in the recovery. It's dramatic. It is dramatic.
Thank you.
All right? Yes.
You refer to yourself as a missile and a weapon. In the years that I worked at the hospital when you were a surgeon, one of the things that I would have never thought was an image of you as either a missile or a weapon, because what I distinctly remember is how absolutely kindly and empathetically I remember specifically working with the parents of a child. I think it was a bicycle accident. It was really pretty ugly. And I remember the tenderness. How did you make that transition from being used as a weapon to absolutely having such ability to be present with people, not just with your skills, but with your heart?
Great.
At some level, that's a mystery. But it's a process of steeping. It's a process of experience. It's a process of maturation. It's a process of looking inside at what hurt as a kid and seeing that in the world, seeing that in everybody you run into. I mean, that's a journey that the path is the goal, so to speak. I had many mentors as far as that kind of behavior. Surgical training, if you have good surgical training, you learn not only how to operate, but how to behave, how to walk into a room, how to speak, how to shut up, who to speak to, what language to use, what pace to use, when to touch, when not to touch. All of that you learn by osmosis in surgical training, if you're lucky. And yeah, I had world-class surgical training.
Dr. Yorke, I want to remind you of a scene in the book over here. Yeah, I'm thinking about mountain climbing a lot now. And so the question is sort of related to that. There's a powerful scene somewhere toward the latter quarter of the book. I think it's Aspen, Colorado, perhaps. You're going up a mountain in the wintertime, and you have, in retrospect, an encounter with a Washington insider, to say the least, where I felt like that guided missile could have been armed and actually struck at a target. If you could say a little something about that, but more than that, I felt like as you're going up that mountain, the book leads to an insight about the surprising nature of life and the awe in the face of it all, which is such a powerful part of this book and really has to do with sort of letting go and letting be. And could you speak a little about that, please?
Yeah, part of the reason that I left the operating room early was because I was becoming too much of an expert. I was seemingly knowing a lot more and more about less and less. And the ability to be surprised is what I've been after for a number of years. And the vignette that Tobias is talking about came probably mid-1990s. we were at Snowmass, Colorado in the summertime, and we were in a low condo, and I took a walk at sunset and walked up from the commercial condos. And I'm walking, and as you walk further up, the homes become harder to see, and the driveways become more secluded, and you're obviously in a more and more elite environment. And I'm walking up, and I see a guy coming down toward me, and he's kind of in distress, and we pass each other, and then he's gone, and I think, holy baloney, that was the guy that sent all those kids my age to get killed. You know, he was the best and the brightest. The chairman of the Ford Motor Company, the Secretary of Defense, Robert McNamara. I recognized him by his glasses. But he was an aged man at that point. And I turned around, and I was ready to confront the guy. I was ready to say, you know, you were, but he had disappeared to one of those exquisitely private driveways. And I stood there thinking, and then I thought, my goodness, it's beautiful here. I can't believe the way it smells. And by the way, it's dinner time. It's time to eat. So anyway, the ability to be surprised, very important, very important.
Hello, Dr. Yorke.
Hey.
Once again. We have spoken many times, and every time I see you, I thank you for what you did for me. And I still can remember the day in 2000 when I was laying in a hospital bed after having a brain tumor taken out by you very, very well. And I was reading the biography of Jerry Garcia. And I remember we had a conversation about the talents of Jerry Garcia and talked music a little. Somehow, you also knew that I was a baseball fan. And your very first remark to me when you came into the hospital room was, Scott, we hit it out of the ballpark.
Dr. Yorke, thank you. I worked with you so many years, and whoever said it, I always told Dr. Yorke after he had gone in to talk to patients and the family and everything, and I mean, you just knew he was hurting because of the message he had to give the family. But I always told him, hey, Dr. Yorke, you know, you are so good. You could tell me I had brain cancer and say, okay. Thank you for all the years you put up with me. And
likewise.
Oh, no, it was a pleasure. It means great you were on call.
Did you know Ben Carson?
Stop. Thea Rodemaker. Wouldn't have happened without her. Flint Hills Publishing. Here we go. Simon & Schuster has nothing on Flint Hills Publishing. Anyway, Ben Carson.
Do you know him or get advice from him, or he get advice from you?
I did not know Ben Carson. I read his memoir. I read Henry Marsh's memoir. I read a couple of other neurosurgical memoirs. I wanted to write something different from what Ben Carson had written. To me, the flaw, the hole in Carson's book is the absence of failure. When you read a book by a neurosurgeon who's done a lot of cases, and you see everybody doing well, and you know that something is missing. I mean, there's pain, there's death, there's paralysis, blindness. There were days when it was one catastrophe after another. So I wanted to somehow capture that, to write a more balanced account of what the OR is like, what the emergency room is like, what existential stuff goes on. So I didn't know him. I think the memoir is good. I like mine too, though.
All right, I think we have time for one more question.
What did you like most about your book?
When sentences came together, when the right word fell into place, Mark Twain's voice was in my head. It was like the tumblers of a safe. When the sentence was right, when the paragraph was right, when there were no extra words, when it just flowed, I really liked that. I was surprised to like the process, the work of it, as much as I did.
All right. Well, let's give it up for Dr. Yorke.
Thank you.
I do have a few wrap-up remarks I want to make. First, Dr. Yorke will be on a panel at the Kansas Book Festival on Saturday, September 20th. This is at Washburn University Library. It is in the old law building now, so it's right on the edge of McVicker. It's called Ad Astra, Emergencies and Restorations. It's at 9 a.m., so first thing in the morning. He will be speaking with Karen Miriam Goldberg, who wrote The Magic Eye, and novelist Ruth Moss, who's over there in the center. So they will be talking about their books and the relationship between struggles and successes. You can find out more information at kansasbookfestival.com. Also, I know we really love talking to the authors after the event, but there's so many people, so I do request that you only go to the line if you want to get your book signed. If you want to hang out, see if you can talk to them after everybody gets their book signed, that's great. But I just want to make sure everybody gets opportunities to get their book signed. Thank you so much.